Under a dark, cloud-filled sky, a McDonald's sits almost forgotten. Its neon sign flickers weakly, casting eerie shadows across the nearly empty parking lot. The only sound is the soft hum of street lamps, their light barely piercing the thick darkness. The restaurant seems to breathe, as if waiting for something or someone. Jake, a young man in his mid-20s, pushes open the door to the dimly lit McDonald's. His uniform is slightly worn, and his eyes reflect the exhaustion of many long nights. As the day shift, employees leave, smiling and waving at him. Jake manages a weary smile in return. But as he steps further into the restaurant, the unnatural dimness seems to swallow him whole, and the smiles of his colleagues fade into the shadows. With the day's shift gone, Jake begins his routine, wiping down the front counter. The restaurant is spotless, the tables and chairs neatly arranged, but the silence is heavy, almost oppressive. Only the faint hum of the kitchen appliances breaks the stillness, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. Every movement Jake makes seems louder than it should be, as if the restaurant is holding its breath. As Jake moves to the back of the restaurant, the lights above him flicker. He stops, glancing around with a mix of confusion and unease. The shadows stretch and twist as the light falters, creating fleeting shapes that disappear as quickly as they appear. Jake shakes his head, trying to dismiss the growing sense of dread that gnaws at him. Jake returns to the front counter, but something is different. The air feels thick, and then he hears it, a faint whisper, barely audible, drifting down from the overhead vents. He freezes, straining to catch the words, but they are indistinct, haunting. His heart beats faster as he scans the empty restaurant, but there's no one there. The whispers continue, teasing his mind, making him question what he's hearing. Determined to shake off his fear, Jake heads to the back of the kitchen. The large metal freezer door stands slightly ajar, a thin mist of cold air seeping out. He hesitates, his hand on the door handle. Something about the freezer feels wrong, but he can't place it. The kitchen around him is dim, the shadows long and threatening. With a deep breath, he pulls the door open and steps inside. Inside the freezer, the air is colder than Jake remembers. Shelves of frozen food surround him, the blue-tinged light casting an eerie glow over everything. Suddenly, the door slams shut behind him with a deafening clang. Panic surges through Jake as he rushes to the door, pounding on it, but it won't budge. The cold seeps into his bones, and his breath forms clouds in the icy air. He is trapped, the silence in the freezer more terrifying than the whispers outside. Just when Jake thinks he'll be trapped forever, the freezer door swings open. He bursts out, stumbling into the brightly lit kitchen. The warmth hits him like a wave, and he gasps for air, his heart racing. But something feels off. The clock on the wall shows 3:33 a.m., and though everything in the kitchen appears normal, the tension in the air is palpable, wrapping around him like an invisible noose. Back in the front of the restaurant, Jake stands in the center of the room. The silence is deafening, and then faintly, he hears it. Footsteps. They are soft, almost imperceptible, but they echo through the empty space, sending chills down his spine. He turns, expecting to see someone behind him, but the restaurant is empty. The shadows on the floor seem to shift, as if something is moving just out of sight. Desperate for some connection to the outside world, Jake pulls out his smartphone, but the screen glitches, showing only static and strange, distorted images. His frustration quickly turns to fear as the phone becomes useless in his hands. He glances around the darkened kitchen, the emergency lights casting a faint glow, and feels more isolated than ever. Jake's eyes are drawn to the wall clock, still stuck at 3:33 a.m. He stares at it, a cold dread washing over him as he realizes time itself has stopped. The restaurant is frozen in a moment of nightmarish stillness, and the more he tries to understand it, the deeper his fear grows. As Jake moves towards the kitchen, something catches his eye. In the reflective surface of the stainless steel counter, a shadowy figure stands behind him. Its eyes glow faintly, watching him. Jake's blood runs cold as he spins around, but there's no one there. The fear is now undeniable. Something is in the restaurant with him. Jake rushes to the front entrance, yanking on the door handle with all his strength. But it won't open. Panic rises in his throat as he pulls and pulls, but the door is locked, trapping him inside. He peers out into the parking lot, but it's dark and deserted, offering no help, no escape.
Help me!
The door chime rings, a sound that usually signals a customer's arrival. Jake looks up, but the lobby is empty. The tables and chairs remain undisturbed, and yet he swears he heard the chime. The thought that someone or something might be playing with him tightens the grip of fear on his heart. Without warning, the restaurant is plunged into near-total darkness. Only a few emergency lights flicker weakly, casting long, twisted shadows. In the oppressive darkness, Jake hears them again, the voices. They whisper his name from every direction surrounding him. The terror in his heart becomes overwhelming as the whispers grow louder, closer. He tries to locate the source, but there's nothing but shadows and the faint glow of the emergency lights. Jake frantically checks every door, every window, but they are all sealed shut. His desperation reaches a peak as he realizes there's no way out. He's trapped in the restaurant, a prisoner to whatever is haunting it. The dim light casts dark shadows in every corner, each one threatening to engulf him. From the kitchen, there's a sudden, violent hiss. Jake turns to see the fryer bubbling over, spilling hot oil onto the floor. He leaps back, narrowly avoiding the scalding liquid. The kitchen fills with the thick, acrid smell of burning oil, the hissing sound filling the silence like a scream. As Jake tries to regain control, the kitchen turns against him. The microwave beeps incessantly. The oven doors slam open and shut, and the coffee machine overflows, spilling scalding liquid everywhere. Fear mixes with frustration as Jake realizes that everything around him is out of control, driven by some unseen force. In the center of the empty lobby, Jake freezes as he sees it, a ghostly version of himself standing across from him. The doppelganger is translucent, its eyes hollow and its smile twisted. Jake's breath catches in his throat as he stares at this twisted reflection of himself, the dim light casting eerie shadows around them. Suddenly, everything stops. The lights stabilize, the appliances fall silent, and the restaurant is plunged into an unnatural calm. Jake stands in the center of the restaurant, his heart racing. The stillness is more terrifying than the chaos that preceded it, as if the calm is only a precursor to something far worse. In a blink, Jake is no longer in the present. The restaurant around him is transformed into a version of itself from decades ago. The decor is outdated, the colors faded. Ghostly figures of former employees and customers move about as if unaware of his presence. Jake watches, horrified, as these specters go about their routines, trapped in a time long gone. Back in the present, Jake finally faces the shadowy figure that has been haunting him. It stands before him, more defined now, its glowing eyes filled with malevolent intent. Jake's fear is palpable, but so is his determination. He demands to know what it wants, his voice shaking with terror and defiance. The freezer door creaks open on its own, releasing a thick fog that spills into the kitchen. The temperature in the room drops sharply, frost forming on the surfaces around Jake. He stands at the edge of the fog, staring into the dark, cold void, fear and curiosity warring within him. Jake steps into the freezer once more, but it's different this time. The space seems to have expanded, the walls covered in thick frost. The blue light is more intense, casting an otherworldly glow. Jake's breath is visible in the frigid air as he ventures deeper into this icy labyrinth, his fear mounting with every step. As Jake moves through the freezer, he stumbles upon frozen figures embedded in the ice. Their faces are contorted in expressions of terror, their eyes wide with fear. Jake's horror deepens as he realizes these are former employees, trapped here, trying to warn him. Their silent screams are etched into the ice, forever frozen in time. In the darkness, Jake hears a voice calling to him, a voice that is unmistakably his own. Confusion and desperation grip him as he follows the voice deeper into the freezer. It echoes off the walls, leading him through the maze, each step pulling him further into the heart of the nightmare. Jake emerges into a room lined with mirrors. Each one reflects a different version of himself. Some younger, some older, all showing varying degrees of fear and despair. He turns in circles, disoriented, as he stares at these fractured reflections of his life. The realization that he's trapped in a twisted version of his own mind begins to sink in. One of the reflections steps out of the mirror, and Jake recoils in horror. It's the shadowy figure, now fully visible as a demonic version of himself. Its eyes glow with a sinister light, sharp teeth gleaming as it grins at him. Jake's terror is overwhelming, but so is his anger. This is the thing that has been tormenting him, and now he must face it. Jake charges at the demon, throwing punches with all his might. But with each strike, the demon grows larger, feeding off Jake's fear. The room fills with the sound of shattering glass as the mirrors break, the glowing shards swirling around them. Jake fights with everything he has, but the demon's strength seems endless. Realizing he can't defeat the demon with anger, Jake forces himself to calm down. He closes his eyes, focusing on his breath, pushing the fear away. The demon begins to shrink, its power waning as Jake's fear diminishes. The shattered mirrors start to repair themselves, reflecting a calmer, more determined version of Jake. When Jake opens his eyes, the demon is much smaller, stumbling back as its strength fades. The mirrors around them continue to crack and shatter, but the fear is gone. The room begins to dissolve into a blinding light, and as the demon crumbles to dust, Jake knows he's won. The freezer begins to collapse around Jake, the walls crumbling and the ceiling caving in. A bright light appears at the far end, illuminating a path to freedom. Jake sprints toward it, his heart filled with hope. He can feel the warmth of the light, the promise of escape from this icy prison. Just as Jake reaches the light, the demon's hand grabs his ankle, trying to drag him back into the darkness. Jake struggles, his fear threatening to overwhelm him. But then he hears the voices of the past employees, their strength flowing into him. With a final surge of determination, Jake breaks free from the demon's grasp and dives into the light. As the sun begins to rise, the morning shift employees enter the restaurant. They find Jake sitting on the floor, his face pale and haunted. Concern fills their eyes as they help him to his feet, but Jake can barely focus on them. The bright light of morning feels harsh, too bright after the darkness of the night. In the break room, Jake tries to explain what happened, but his co-workers listen with skepticism. Their doubt is clear, and it frustrates Jake. How can he make them understand the terror he lived through? The fear in his eyes is real, but their disbelief only deepens his sense of isolation. As Jake prepares to leave, he notices small things that feel off. A clock that's a few minutes slow, a shadow that seems to flicker just out of sight, a chill in the air that shouldn't be there. Unease coils in his stomach as he realizes that the nightmare might not be over. The horror may have left its mark, and he's not sure if he'll ever truly escape it. In the manager's office, Jake sits with his head in his hands. The manager, a stern but concerned man, offers him time off to recover. The office is neat and orderly, a stark contrast to the chaos Jake has just survived. But the manager's words barely register. Jake is too consumed by the lingering fear and exhaustion that gnaws at him. Before leaving, Jake heads to the break room one last time. With a pen, he carves a small warning into the wall: "Beware the night shift." It's a simple message, but Jake hopes it will protect others from the horrors he faced. The break room is quiet and empty, the morning light soft and gentle, but Jake knows it's only a matter of time before the cycle begins again. Jake walks across the empty parking lot, the early morning sun rising behind him. He glances back at the McDonald's, its golden arches now seeming darker and less inviting. A shiver runs down his spine as he turns away, getting into his car. As he drives away, the relief of leaving mixes with a lingering fear. He's escaped, but only just. The road stretches out before Jake, the sun rising higher in the sky. The clear morning light brings a sense of hope, and Jake's grip on the steering wheel loosens slightly. He's free for now, but as the distance between him and the restaurant grows, so does the hope that the nightmare won't follow him. Days later, a new employee arrives for their first night shift. The McDonald's is brightly lit, welcoming, and warm. They smile as they step inside, eager to begin. But in the shadows, something lingers, watching, waiting. The new employee is blissfully unaware of the horrors that await. As the new employee starts their shift, wiping down tables and restocking supplies, the lights flicker briefly. They pause, glancing around with a slight frown. The restaurant is quiet, too quiet, and the shadows seem to creep along the edges of the room, just out of sight. Standing near the front counter, the new employee hears a faint whisper, barely audible, coming from the vents. Confusion turns to mild fear as they glance around, but the restaurant remains empty. The dim lighting casts long shadows, and the employee feels a shiver of unease. The new employee heads to the front door for a quick break, but it's locked. Panic sets in as they pull on the handle, but it won't budge. The parking lot outside is dark and empty, and the realization that they're trapped begins to sink in. The new employee stands in the center of the restaurant, the shadows creeping closer. From the darkness, the shadowy figure with glowing eyes emerges, fixing its gaze on them. Terror fills the employee's face as they sense the entity's presence, knowing that escape is impossible. The restaurant is plunged into darkness, with only the emergency lights casting a dim, flickering glow. The new employee hears footsteps behind them, turning just in time to see the demonic figure approaching. Their face is frozen in fear as the cycle of horror begins anew. Jake may have escaped. The darkness lingers, waiting for the next victim to fall into its trap. The once comforting golden arches now serve as a warning. Some nightmares never truly end. Beware the night shift, for the shadows never sleep, and the cycle of terror continues. The legend lives on, whispered by those brave enough to listen, reminding us that not every escape is final, and the darkness is always waiting.